look at like the complexity of just every single object and the coordination required to produce every object you interact with. That's done through the economy.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Curiosity Class. I am super stoked today to sit down with my friend Max Sacher. He is a PhD candidate at UT McCombs School of Business in the finance department. And ever since I found out that you could get a PhD in finance, I've been extremely fascinated and have wanted to talk to you. So thank you so much for being here, man. I appreciate you.
Yeah, of course. Happy to finally make it on.
So I want to give people a little bit of a background. Again, I didn't know you could have a PhD in finance. I didn't know that was a thing. What was your undergrad in? How did you decide that you wanted to get a PhD in finance? Walk me through it.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I also did not realize that a PhD in finance was a thing. So I did my undergrad at William and Mary, and it was in math and economics. And I ultimately, my father has a PhD in economics, so he really brought me up into it, like very nerdy. So ultimately I was like, oh, I want to go and get a PhD in economics. And so I went, and I actually, right out of college, I worked for 2 years for a bunch of finance professors. And after working for them, they were like, oh, you shouldn't do a PhD in economics. Like, it's a really crowded field and you don't make as much money. And, if you really care about like firms and, what you think economics really is, you should get a PhD in finance. And when you look at like sort of the cost benefits, oh, it actually turns out that a PhD in finance, um, you get very, very similar training, but the outcomes are actually a lot better. So maybe this is a secret I shouldn't say, because a lot of people don't do it. But yeah, basically I wanted to do a PhD econ, but then I saw, oh, this is like just a better kind of degree to get if you want to end up in academia.
Okay. And what was it about economics? Obviously, you grew up with it, so there was probably some familiarity with it. But what about economics? Because I think PhD candidates are the coolest people ever. In that, every time I ask what they do, their response is always, "Well, I'm interested in," and that's how you share what your research is. And I think that's a really beautiful way to answer the question of what do you do? Because it's if someone asks me "Oh, what do you do?" It's well, I'm interested in and I just think that's a really beautiful way to answer that question. It's what about economics was interesting to you, or what about it were oh, this is what I want to go dive deep and become world class at?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I say that's a really good question all the time. I don't know, it's just every time a student asks a question when I'm teaching, that's my initial response. That is a really good question, though. Gosh, so Alexander Pope, right, said that the proper study of mankind is man, and that's sort of what economics is about. Um, Basically, when you want to look out and understand society, and you see, oh, some countries are really, really rich, you compare to how people live nowadays, and it would be magic to people just even 100, 200 years ago. And where did all this amazing material wealth come from? What sort of systems and societies allowed that to happen? And then you look at some other countries that it's really heartbreaking, kind of the poverty that exists over there. You say, wow, we have such disparities in this world. We have had such growth. What determines, how the day to day of how people live their lives. And economics is really the subject that tries and attacks that question, tries to understand, why are some countries rich? Why are some countries poor? Why do some people succeed and some people don't? And it's a really rigorous framework as well, right? Because there could be 5 trillion different answers to that question. And so how do you systematically have a way to answer those really, really important questions? I think that's what drove me to economics.
Damn, yeah, that's a really good answer to that question. Holy smokes.
I know. I think I don't know why everyone doesn't do a PhD in economics. I mean, you just look out at your day-to-day life and, look at the complexity of just every single object and the coordination required to produce every object you interact with. That's done through the economy. And so I
Right.
just can't see how you can't look at the world and wonder and then want to understand that and not go to economics.
So with that wonder, curiosity, like how did you get obviously it sounds like the finance route became okay, it's a different route to get to actually the same destination. That's the destination I want to get to, and I can get there by studying finance instead of economics for the reasons that you laid out earlier.
A little bit. I mean, so I would say I don't want to say anything controversial, but I have my opinions, and I'm going to say my opinions.
Yeah,
But I
please.
think also in its own way, economics has also kind of lost its central purpose, right? You can go and you can look at like sort of like the top econ papers that are being published, and it's just not about what you would think economics is. I think that's really due to like Gary Becker, who really started saying, "Oh, wait, we can use our economic framework to start looking at, all sorts of, you know, random questions, and then people need to publish papers to get tenure." And so you have all these papers that sort of have lost the plot a little bit. And I think finance, because it's a lot smaller and a lot more focused on a specific subject, kind of like to me feels a lot more like classic, the kind of classic econ that I like. And so I
Got
think
it.
that's another reason of why the PhD in finance is a lot more interesting to me.
Sure, sure. And do you have a like a subspecialty, like a category within broader finance that you're working on?
Yeah, so actually right now, I'm working on a couple of different projects with like private equity and private credit as well. So I've actually been looking at the news. There's been a lot of stuff in the news about private credit, how a lot of the firms that they invested in, they marked all these loans and they're probably all marked wrong. So the investors are going to be losing a lot of money. And
Okay.
so we're kind of looking at private credit and this marking of their loans right now,
Okay. I
but
want to
sort of like the private space.
sure, sure. Let's define a couple of those terms because I think I hear private credit and I think I've said that phrase many times. I couldn't tell you what it means. What is when someone says private credit, when you refer to private credit, like what does that mean if I'm a third grader?
Yeah, sure. So you want to start a business, but you don't have enough money to start a business. So you have to go get a loan.
Okay.
Well, traditionally, you could go to a commercial bank, your Chase Bank branch, and say, "Hey, I want to start a business. Can you loan me money?" And after 2008, a lot of these banks got really constrained on the risk that they can take. And so when you go to Chase Bank, they say, "No, sorry, we can't give you a loan." And so basically, guys with really, really big pockets said, "Well, we don't want to participate in the commercial banking system. We can just set up our own firm that just gives out loans instead of taking in deposits."
Got
And
it.
so we take money from rich investors and loan that out. And so now when you want to go start your business, instead of going to the commercial bank, you can go to say like Blackstone or BlackRock or KKR, and they'll give you a loan instead.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Okay. If I'm on the consumer end, like as a business owner, can I think of that similarly to like if you have if you open a credit card, sometimes they'll offer you like a personal line of credit where they're like, oh, you can have this at whatever 12%. Is that a similar idea? But it's just one you're going to the credit card company, one you're going to these KKR private credit company.
So, like a revolving line of credit is a little bit different from like a traditional loan. They offer both, but most of what we see is more like your traditional loans where you have, some face value, some expiration date, and some interest rate.
Okay.
So it's not quite like a credit card. It's more like think of it like a mortgage.
Like a mortgage. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. 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 Okay. Um, Man, that's awesome. I feel like that's super interesting. So, and then what about the private equity stuff are you working on?
So this is really recent. Um, but so I have this other paper where I look at sort of real estate. This is sort of like still in that real estate area. But one thing that's become really, really popular in private equity is what's called serial acquisition. So you take a really, really fragmented industry. And so you may have happened with your doctor, right? So, a lot of dentists or doctors have their own practice. So it's a really fragmented industry. And private equity comes in and will buy up, all the practices in a particular area and basically, do what private equity does, make them more efficient, but also probably raise prices as well. And so there's been some papers looking at these serial acquisitions in healthcare and sort of what impacts that had. But I'm curious in, okay, well, they've also been doing these serial acquisitions and inputs into construction. So you look at like HVAC and electricians, those kind of guys. So they've been getting bought up a lot by PE and sort of consolidated. The question is so what effect does this have when it comes to the cost of building a house?
Interesting.
That's
Can you
another
share
kind of
like
dilemma.
some of what you're finding, or is it too
So
soon?
this is really, really, really preliminary. So
Okay.
it could 100% change in a month from now. I just want to preface with that. But it looks like when they do these serial acquisitions, the cost goes up. So they come in, they buy all the HVAC, and then it becomes more expensive to install HVAC in homes. So then the next question is, does this raise house prices? That I don't know yet.
Right.
But
But so doesn't that like kind of, and again, I like got, I think a C plus in like Econ 101. So like, I'm going to say words in terms that probably don't make sense, but like, doesn't that kind of make sense if you take supply and demand? Like if you have the idea with more competition is it lowers prices, right? So by definition, if you're buying up all the competition and putting it and consolidating into one, that decreases competition, and it makes sense. They would increase prices. No?
so there's kind of two forces at work. So yeah,
Okay.
you're totally correct. There's this one force of okay, we come in, because there's less competition, right? We're able to raise the price. But on the other hand, why does private equity come in? Well, they think that they can acquire this firm and
Mm-hmm.
lower costs, right? We can
Mm-hmm.
run this firm more efficiently. And how
Mm-hmm.
can we like take over the market? Well, if we charge a lower price at lower costs, we could actually make more money. And so,
Sure.
there's this professor at NYU, Sabina Howell, and a lot of her work is actually in private equity comes in because they're able to run firms more efficiently. They actually lower prices and are beneficial for consumers. And
Interesting.
so this is kind of the classic trade-off that regulators have to work with when they review mergers, right? Because there's always these two forces of okay, there's less competition, but you might get economies of scale and more efficiencies from larger firms. And so it
Right.
really is an empirical question what the ultimate effect is of consolidation.
Got it. Dude, that's wild. So what, like when you get together with your colleagues, do you guys discuss like what's the best way to run an economy? Like what is like, and obviously it's a huge question and there's so many inputs and there's so many outputs, but like at the end of the day when all is said and done, like what kind of economy would you as an individual want to live in? Like do you guys discuss that like around the
I
water
don't know if
cooler?
that particular question has ever come up, but I think a lot of the time the conversation is, oh, I noticed this like weird thing that's going on that doesn't quite fit in our framework. Like, how can we explain this? And there is a lot of room for debate. So I'm like a pretty I guess like rationalist guy. I think people are pretty good at what they do. And so I'll say, oh, this is probably like some sort of efficiency that they figured out. Then I have another, PhD student here, Tommy Brown, who just got a job at BYU actually, and he's like a very behavioralist. So he's always telling me like, oh no, it's like people are being dumb. They're making a mistake here, and the firms are kind of exploiting them. Uh, and so we usually like clash a little bit in how we interpret sort of the same sort of fact that we see.
That's so interesting. So like what do you where do you like do you guys think that you come at it with different pers I mean obviously you do because you're both individuals, but like how does that influence like I don't know, work that you do or like or does it influence work that you do?
No, definitely. So he does a lot of work on retail. So retail investors are people like you and me who
Okay.
who aren't at firms. He does a ton of work on retail investors and how basically when they play in these big financial markets, they're taken advantage of a lot. So he has this really interesting paper um, on basically limit orders and market orders. So just to define that,
Thank
when
you.
you go to the stock market and say, hey, I want to buy, 100 shares of Tesla, well, you can specify just 100 shares. And you can say, okay, I want to buy 100 shares of Tesla at a max price of $150 a share. So keep trading until it hits this price and stop. And basically the classic result is that, okay, you can never pay more doing the limit order than compared to a market order, right? So because the limit order specifies a max price, you know, and the market order could go above that max price, the limit order you're always gonna pay less.
So wait, so just to convert, so the limit order you say I don't want to pay $150, I don't want to pay above $150 for a share of Tesla versus the market order is I want to buy a share of Tesla whatever the price is.
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly. And so, it seems like pretty obvious that you're gonna end up paying less, even if you might not get all your shares, but you're gonna end up paying less with the market order, with the limit
With
order.
the limit order. So okay, but so what does that have to do with like how does that take advantage with retail investors? I don't understand the
Yeah,
connection.
great. I'm just setting the playing field. So he has this. So it's really interesting. So it turns out though, when us go on our Robinhood app to actually buy a stock, well, our order doesn't go right to the exchange. There's these really big guys like Citadel who will say, okay, instead of sending that order to the exchange, we'll fulfill it with our giant stock of Tesla shares. Now,
Okay.
when they do that, they're required to give you a certain amount of price improvement over the market by getting that order flow. And so they
Okay.
have to say, okay, Tesla's trading at $100. We'll fulfill their order for $99.99. They have to give you
Okay.
some price improvement. What's
Okay.
really interesting is the price improvement for the market order is actually larger than the price improvement for the limit order. And so when you submit your limit, so you'll get 10 cents off for doing a market order, whereas you'll only get 5 cents off doing a limit order. And the
Okay.
idea is that more sophisticated investors, people who might have more information, are going to be the ones submitting the limit orders.
Limit
It's like a more
orders.
sophisticated investor. And so
Whoa.
Citadel knows this and says, okay, well, we want to incentivize, kind of the dumb people. And so we'll give a better price improvement with the market orders. And so he's basically saying, oh, like we teach everyone that you can't, you can always do better with a limit order. That's basically not true because we have
Whoa.
these really big players like Citadel.
So I didn't know that. So when you buy or sell a stock via Robinhood or Vanguard or whatever your brokerage is, so that actually doesn't go directly to the stock market. That goes through there's another company that sits in the middle.
Yeah. So there's these firms. Yeah, like Citadel, there's three big firms. Citadel's the only one I can remember off the top of my head. But
Okay.
they will pay these guys for the order flow. And so they'll pay
Wow.
Robinhood like 1 cent to be able to fulfill the order instead of it going right to the
And they're
exchange.
getting millions and millions and millions of orders every day. So they're just racking up, 1 cent times millions and millions is a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. Yeah. So this is like a pretty controversial. It's called payment for order flow.
Okay.
Um, and it's a pretty controversial uh, topic, I would say.
So yeah, has there ever been a study that looks at, okay, what if it did just go, what if the orders went directly from the consumer to the market? And then what would that do to the price of the stock as you're buying it? So to use the Tesla example, okay, if you buy it at $100, Citadel gives it to you for $99.99. Would the market give you $99.98? Like
No, it'd be $100. So basically, it's called Reg NMC. This is like the price improvement. So Citadel does have to give you a better price than you would get going to the
at the,
market.
got it, got it, got it.
So
So
that's basically their argument for why it's beneficial to consumers.
what's the incentive? Because then isn't Citadel selling it at a loss, quote unquote?
Well, they make money on the flow,
Okay.
right? They make money. Basically, they're perfectly hedged against any big movements in the price, and so they make money by so they'll buy it on like the spread between buying and selling. So when you
But
buy
if,
it, so the price is like $100, but when you want to buy, you have to pay like 102. When you want to sell, it'll be like 98, right?
okay.
And so
Okay.
there's some sort of spread, and they make money off the spread.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Okay. Dude, that's wild.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. Do you have like personal thoughts about that? Like, do you like that or do you not like that?
That's a good that's a good question. What are my thoughts on payment for order flow? It's tough to see I don't think the little guy is getting screwed over there. I
Right.
think the fact that they have to improve the price and it improves a lot of liquidity of the market is probably I'm convinced enough that it's probably a fine thing to happen. I mean,
Yeah.
Citadel does get a lot of private information out of it as well, so they probably make a lot of money trading on that in like the more sophisticated markets as well. But I don't think it's the retail guys who are getting screwed over by payment for order flow.
Interesting. 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 Does your work sit like, do you, or yeah, I guess, does your work sit in the intersection between like regulation and behavior? So like, do you learn or do you teach a lot about like the way governments govern and how that affects markets? Or are they kind of separate?
Well, the thing is, a market, this is okay. A market is kind of like an emergent thing from how you set the rules of the game, right?
Okay.
So
Ooh,
like,
I like that. That's a cool
not
definition.
not all markets are the same. You say the word market, right? But markets are very diverse. Right? You have different kinds of competition, different levels of competition. The price mechanism itself can be different, right? You can have like an auction is a kind of price mechanism. That's very
And
different from
what does price
sort of like a
mechanism
limit
mean?
order book. Yeah.
What does price mechanism mean? What does that mean?
Just like how you're allocating the resource, right? So think of
Okay.
like an auction is one particular mechanism, right? That determines a price that decides, who pays what and who gets the good.
Sure.
Whereas you have like just think of like going to a store where there's a posted price, and that's kind of a different way of deciding, who gets what and how much they pay,
Sure.
right? And that's driven by, when I go to the store, I don't want to haggle over the price.
Right. Right.
Right? I like the security in that, but that's driven by the institutions and what people expect, and so it's difficult to separate the markets that we find ourselves in from sort of how we're setting the ground rules of how you interact in those markets.
Right. 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 Okay. That makes sense. So
Yeah,
do you have a
and
point of
so
view
if
on? Yeah. Sorry.
sorry,
Go.
so if you want to like teach about financial markets, well, yeah, you have to teach about the regulation because the regulation is kind of what drives the behavior you see in those markets. The market is
Got it.
not separate from how we're setting our institutions.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Okay. So so kind of going back to like, what do you think is the best economy? Like, I kind of want to harp on that for a second because like I'm always so curious. Like, I meet someone from like I lived in Canada for a year, right? And I I was 15, so I wasn't thinking about like, why is Canada different from America? Or like, and like, I love meeting people and just asking them like, what do you think? Like, what do you love about your country? What do you not like about your country? And obviously, like, we live in really weird political times. Like, some people love America and other people like hate it.
Yeah.
Um, but like, I'm just always so curious. Like, when you're looking at countries and economies and around the world, like, what do you see as like the best? Like, what do you see as like the thing that we should all be striving to be more like from an economic and like day to day civilian perspective? I guess small question.
Yeah, a small uncontroversial question.
Mm.
It's funny. So, but I think I have a small uncontroversial answer. Ultimately, I think like I got into this for one reason. I think there's only one thing that really matters, and it's growth. And as bad as it is, I think there's only one number that matters, and that's GDP, right? Like,
Okay, okay.
uh,
So what does that mean? Gross domestic product. But what does that mean if I'm a third grader?
it's just how much stuff does your country make?
Okay, okay,
How many buildings? How many planes? How many computers does your country produce? Uh, I think that's just the most important number. Like we haven't cured poverty yet. Once we cure poverty, then we can start worrying about, who gets what. But I think first we need to make sure everyone's getting something, there's enough for everyone to get something. That's kind of like
sure.
the first step.
Okay,
And
okay,
so when you look at GDP and then you say, okay, who has the biggest GDP? Well, that's the US of A.
okay. Interesting. And so so okay, I think what I'm hearing you say is like, yeah, in order to so like the fact that we have poverty isn't actually a question. It's not a problem of like we don't make enough stuff. We make plenty. It's just a question of like, okay, how do we get stuff to everyone?
I disagree. No, I
Really?
think,
Okay, okay,
yeah, yeah. So I think a lot of people say, oh, we produce so much, it's just, and then we throw out so much. I think we're still fundamentally constrained, by what we can.
okay.
And so you know, I think we need to increase GDP even more. I think a lot of our problems are not enough growth and not like a question of inequality.
Interesting. And when you say growth, that does that usually mean like top line GDP? Like is that kind of the top line? Like think of like revenue of a country.
So yes, now it gets like a little more nuanced. So I would say like productivity is really
Oh, okay, okay,
the most important number. So given some inputs, how much can you produce? How many outputs can you make?
okay. Gotcha. Yeah. So you have 5
So
going in. How many do you make? What's your
yeah,
output?
the fancy word for this would be like TFP, total factor productivity.
Oh, okay. I've never heard. Okay, cool. That's a
Yeah,
really okay.
that's like the fancy term in econ. But again, I also want to say, I'm wandering into like macro territory here, and macro was like my worst subject. And so this is like you're getting like a real, you know, econ 102 opinion on the macro stuff here.
Okay. Okay. Fair enough.
But that is my opinion. I mean, I guess it is a little more philosophy as well. But
Sure.
that is my opinion, is that if we just made more stuff, things would be a lot better. And
Interesting.
I think a lot of politics is kind of a side game to the fact that there's still scarcity.
Interesting. Do Can we talk about like the national debt for a little bit?
Sure.
Like I'm always just really I feel like I don't understand a lot of it, right? So like okay, we any government, to my understanding, brings in money through taxes, right? And that's kind of like that's their revenue driver, right? And then
Yeah.
they can spend on whatever they want: infrastructure, roads, schools, hospitals, all that stuff. And so my understanding is like the U.S. brings in, let's keep the math easy, $1 million, and they spend way more than $1 million. And so they're able to bridge that gap by, I think, printing money. That's my understanding. No. Okay. So how do they bridge that gap?
Well, why can't they print a bunch of money? Well, if you printed a whole bunch of money, the money would quickly become worthless, right?
Okay.
So money, right? What do you do with money? Well, you have to buy real goods with that money, right?
Sure.
And so everyone has $10, but there's still the same amount of goods being produced. Well, I'm going to start charging more for that one good because 50 people want it now.
Sure.
And so if you
Sure.
print
Okay.
a whole bunch of money, you're going to get a whole bunch of inflation.
Okay. So
Money
so
money is tied to the real
so
economy. So how does the government fund itself?
yeah, how
It
does it work?
borrows money.
Okay. From
And
who?
so from who? From really rich people, and from other countries, and from like a lot of funds as well. So gosh, see, this is another. So I also don't do bond markets, but basically every year, every 6 months, I think the government has an auction where they require. I think there's like 5 firms to bid on their debt. They say, "Hey, we're going to sell $2 million worth of 6 month bonds. We're going to sell, $4 million of 1 year bonds and $10 million of 30 year bonds. And this debt is going to go on auction between these 5 different firms, and whoever else wants to submit a bid, and that's who then basically loans the government the money."
And it's just the money that they need to make up the difference. So if they bring in $1 million, they're spending 2 million. There's $1 million of difference, so they need to go out and raise $1 million to cover the difference. And
Yeah,
that's what is
essentially.
that what a bond is? A bond is just like
A bond is a loan, another word for a loan. Yeah, finance
okay,
loves creating terms for things you already have heard of. But yeah, a bond is just a loan. It's just a loan.
okay. And so the
Yeah.
government's saying, hey, we need more money, so let's go raise it from these 5 firms. So who are the 5 firms? Those are just like private companies.
So these are really big. These are really big banks.
Okay,
Yeah, but also, I mean, so these guys are required to bid, but you can also, other firms who want U.S. government debt can also participate in the auction as well. But it's just that these guys are required because the government wants to make sure somebody will buy its debt. It's guaranteed to fund itself. And so
right.
these guys say, okay, well, uh, I think they get some sort of privileges as well. I'm not totally. So there is a lot of plumbing that I'm
Dude,
not.
that's crazy. Wait. So the government is like, yo, we didn't bring in enough money. We got to go get some money. Also, we mandated the fact that at least 5 companies have to bid on our debt. Anyone else can come too, but those 5 have to, or else.
Yeah,
Dude, that's
that's my
wild.
understanding of a little bit of how the plumbing works. Yeah,
That's so wild.
there's a lot of plumbing that goes into it. Yeah, but
So is going back to like your growth, I guess, philosophy, like is your point of view that like, okay, yeah, debt's a problem. Like you shouldn't, well, is debt a problem, I guess? Before I ask that.
it it's what's that? It's like a gosh, I can't remember who said it. But he said, how did I think it might have been Hemingway. how did I become poor? Very slowly at first, then all at once,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And government debt is similar. It's like it's not a problem until, yeah, it really is a problem all at
Until it
once.
is. Yeah.
And so, I think everyone kind of knows that, the US is on a pretty unsustainable path. At what
With
point,
spending, like from the
yeah, with the
spending.
spending,
Yeah.
with its debt, at some point, people aren't going, the government won't be able to, pay all these loans back, or, the interest payments are going to
Be
itself
too high.
need debt, going to become too high. And so at
Yeah.
that point, the bond's probably going to become worthless because the government's going to either have to default or inflate its way out of it. And that becomes a really, really nasty situation to be in. But when that happens, I
Nobody
don't think
knows.
anyone knows. So it's just a bit of a ticking time bomb, but it is a problem. And, nobody wants to be the guy that says, hey, I'm going to cut the spending and, raise the revenue. It's
Right. Right.
politically
Right.
kind of unfeasible. No party seems to care anymore.
Right. 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 Yeah. That's that's interesting. So would growth still helps? I guess it would help that problem. It's unclear if it would solve the problem.
Yeah, I don't think there's any realistic growth path that allows us to grow out of our debt. But
Okay.
growth would definitely make it a lot less of a problem because the government would bring in a lot more revenue.
Sure. Sure. Maybe this is a silly question, but like, what do governments spend money on? And if you don't know, that's totally fine. Like, I kind of put you on the spot here. Like, like we have a household budget. We pay rent. We buy food, and I'm sure governments do the same thing. But like, at a certain point, if we're like, oh crap, we're spending a lot more money than we're bringing in, like we have to go out to eat less.
Yeah,
Like,
so
does that happen in governments? Is that a thing?
this is a good question as well, because it lets me tell another joke. um, right? So like the classic joke is that the U.S. government is an insurance company with an army. Um, so what does it spend most of its money on? Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and then the U.S. Military.
Okay.
And
So those are
that's like almost. I'm not gonna get the number right off of your head, but those are like the real big, maybe like 60, 70, 80% of government spending is Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and the military.
holy smokes.
And the thing is so there's also two kinds of spending. There's discretionary spending and non-discretionary spending.
Okay.
So non-discretionary, it's legally mandated into law how much the government has to spend, right? Your Social Security is determined by a formula.
Okay.
So, when the budget comes around, legislatures, they don't get to decide how much is going to Social Security, how much is not. We just know that that's a fixed amount that has to be paid by law. Same thing
Right.
with Medicare and Medicaid. That's non-discretionary, right? The government just has to spend that money unless Congress comes around and passes a new law about, Social Security or Medicare and Medicaid, which
Okay.
again is, politically unfeasible. Economically,
Sure.
probably not. And then the rest is like discretionary spending. So, we have choice about how much we want to give to the military, how much we want to spend on SNAP and that kind of stuff. But that really is not going to solve the budget, right? You want to solve the budget, you have to go after one of these really big programs.
Got it. Got it. Or and grow. So like you want to
And grow.
grow and
Yeah.
like cut big expenditures, big line
Yeah.
items on your budget.
It's tough though, because, every dollar of government spending it's a dollar in somebody's pocket. So, it's not as
Sure.
if there's a lot of waste. I mean, there isn't. I mean, it depends. If you're the guy getting the dollar, it's not waste. So
Sure.
it's
Sure.
really tough to find good ways to cut and get back on track, I guess.
Sure. And I'm sure it's probably way easier said than done too, because you could say like, oh, why are we spending all this money on X? But like you said, to the person getting those dollars, it's again, as a rationalist, people are doing a good job and they care about what they do. So,
Yeah, and it's tough to say, hey, we're going to cut the spending to your, grandfather's medical care,
right.
which
Right.
kind of is what it has. We're
So
going to cut medical spending to, people who are, poor people.
right.
It's just the political capital is just not there.
So how do other countries do it? Because this is a total not data backed at all. This is like a pure like feeling. So this is probably super incorrect. But I feel like a typical Canadian or a typical European like feels wealthier to me. Like it just there's a feeling of like the person working at a coffee shop takes vacation. And like again, I don't know what that is or why that is, but and maybe again it's completely wrong. But like how do other countries figure it out where like they do seemingly have pretty not great, but pretty good healthcare? Like everyone's pretty happy with it. Pretty good quality of life. Yeah, their taxes are high, but like it seems to work. So what have other countries figured out that we haven't, or vice versa? Is that just a question of okay, all of that extra goes to our growth? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I would say there's two questions there. One is like about standards of living, and the other
Mm-hmm.
one is about healthcare. Um,
Okay, fair enough.
I'm
Yeah.
I'm happy to admit that healthcare in America is like particularly screwed up. It's a real kludge of a system that kind of like emerged really, really poorly after World War II. It really is not great, and I think a lot of other countries have much better systems than us. Germany, in particular, I think has a pretty well run system. The issue again is like it's so entrenched here that until there's some sort of catastrophe, nothing is really ever going to fix the healthcare here. Yeah, our healthcare
Interesting.
system has a lot of issues. Um, it really is. I mean, it's this real, yeah, we were really set down a really bad path, and no, it's not gonna be able to fix it. On the other hand, let's talk about the standard of living. I mean, I'm happy to delve into both.
Yeah.
I did in undergrad, I did do a little research in healthcare econ, so I know a little bit about that.
Okay.
Um, but on the standard of living thing, I think this is just kind of a trade-off between American lifestyle and maybe European lifestyle. So I think if you look in terms of consumption, Americans actually just consume a lot more and a lot bigger things. So you look like our houses are bigger, our
Yeah.
cars are bigger. We take bigger vacations when we take vacations. So if you look at consumption, Americans consume a lot, right? But when you look at Europeans, I think like they take a lot more leisure, but
Sure.
they consume a lot less, and so
Sure.
that's sort of the trade-off I think that you see there. And so that's more of a, I would say, like a cultural thing than an economic system thing.
Got it.
If
Got it. Got it. Fair enough.
the French wanted to consume the same sort of size houses and consume in the same way as Americans, they could do it, but then they would look a lot more like America, and probably not as much because they produce a lot less as well.
Sure.
But I think that's more sort of a cultural thing of you know how they choose to live their lives than sort of like ultimately the economic system.
Interesting. That makes sense. Uh, a question I've always thought about is like why I feel like in America we have 50 different states, right? And my wife always gives me crap because she thinks it's really funny when I ask this question. But if we have 50 different states, why don't we run 50 different experiments to figure out like, okay, there's a federal grant to go fix healthcare. Like, wasn't Obamacare modeled after what Mitt Romney
Yes.
did in Massachusetts?
Yes.
So like, why don't we do like all like the every 4 years they have this conversation, nationalize healthcare, and it's like, wait, why don't we like like why doesn't California, who has a bunch of money, make like California Care, and like give all their citizens free healthcare and like figure it out? And I'm sure it's going to be wonky, but then you fix it over time and you iterate on it and you make it better, and then that goes up to the national level. Like I've never understood why states don't run these little experiments and then bring it up. Like, does that happen, or is I guess it did with Massachusetts, but
So I think in areas where states, can experiment, you look at education, right? I think you have a lot of different educational systems at the state level that get
Mhm.
tried, and every couple of years you see, ooh, look at the miracle that happened in this state. Why don't we do this at a national level? So I think in certain policy areas, you definitely see, that part of federalism being implemented. But I am of the same mind as you, right? I think that is like one of the really great strengths of the American system is this federalism between the states and the federal government. And I'm also curious as to why, we don't run a whole bunch of different experiments and see which works and which doesn't. Maybe there's some sort of, political thing happening at each state level where, since they're all states and they all sort of have probably a similar political game to play at the state level. Things that aren't feasible in California probably aren't feasible in Illinois as well. And
Mm-hmm.
so, as much as we would like to run the experiment, because states can select into the experiment or not, if one state doesn't want to do it, then probably all the other states don't want to do it as well. And so you would
Interesting.
probably have to force the experiment from the top down,
Which,
which then kind
yeah,
of sort
that
of
gets
defeats the
tricky.
purpose of the federalism. But I think in certain areas, right, like we saw it in healthcare, and we see it in education.
Mm-hmm.
I
And
think
I think, didn't Stockton, California run like a UBI um, experiment? I think they did it for like a
maybe
year.
I'm not familiar. Uh,
Okay.
but then there also is this other issue, right? California wants to do a wealth tax. Um, but
Right.
one big critique that people bring up is, well, people can just leave California. There's pretty
Right.
low moving costs as
Right.
well. And so say you do want to run this experiment, well, if people don't like it, you won't be able to run it on anymore. You're going to lose. It's really, really
Right.
bad. So there's a lot of risk
Right.
there as well for states to change the status quo. So I think there's
Interesting.
some risk aversion also playing into it.
That makes sense. What are your thoughts on the wealth tax or and I know very few details other than like what I've read in the headlines is like, oh, you will be taxed. It's like a one-time thing and you're taxed on all of your assets, right?
I'm also not super familiar with what it is in particular. To me, I think a wealth tax is a little bit foolish. First, it's really, really tough to measure wealth. You have all these assets that aren't traded, that don't have a price, and you now have to put a price on them and say how much you have to pay for it. But also, it
Right.
makes it really, really difficult to save, right? So you earn your income and then you go save your income. You
Mm-hmm.
already paid a tax on your income. Now you're
Right.
paying a tax on the income that you're trying to save.
Right.
And ultimately, what does that savings do? Well, that sort of is what gets invested in and drives the growth. And so a
Right.
tax on wealth is really a tax on saving, which I think ultimately is really bad for the economy. I think if we wanted a
Hmm.
tax, I think a consumption tax is really the one that makes the most sense to me.
What does that mean?
You can think of it sort of as like a sales tax, right? So, you want to go buy something, you have to pay basically based on that consumption, right? And so there's, consumption, income, and wealth, are all kind of the things you can tax, but they're all ultimately some, yeah. Uh, yeah. So I think the consumption tax is the one that makes the most sense in my
Right.
mind.
And isn't like I totally agree with you. I think that makes a lot of sense. I just have like just to play
Okay, well
devil's
then let me
advocate.
say why you shouldn't agree with me. So,
Please.
So why do we not have a consumption tax? Well, consumption tax is regressive, right?
What
So
does that
if
mean?
you have right, so a progressive tax means the more money you make, the more right. So you pay 10% on your first $1,000, or you can pay 20% on your next on the $10,000, right?
Sure.
So the tax as you make more money, you pay more.
Sure.
Well, regressive means that say the tax on your first $1,000 was 20%, and then the tax on your $10,000 was 10%, right? And so as you
Mm,
make more money,
okay.
the less taxes you pay. That's actually how a consumption tax works, right? So if you make
How?
right, so if you make less money, you basically just because you have a fixed cost of living, you just have to spend more of your income. And so people who make less money spend more of their income on consumption, and so therefore will be paying a higher tax.
Oh,
And
I
so it
see. I see.
actually
Okay.
charges poor individuals more. The
Got it.
consumption tax.
Got it. Got it.
There's ways around that, obviously. Like you can
Right.
just give a subsidy, give a tax break to people who make less money but that makes the system slightly more complicated. So
Sure.
there are still drawbacks that you need to consider. There's no perfect tax system.
Right. Right.
But I think if you weigh the pros and cons, I think a consumption tax is probably the best tax. But you can totally disagree with that.
But
Like there's
isn't
definitely a debate to have.
I thought the whole thing with like yeah, I just want like just to push back on a little bit of what you said, like the it's kind of a tax on savings. I hear that like that makes sense to me if you're someone who's saving, like you make money, then you're saving money, and then like yeah, you don't want to tax that person's savings. But I guess the pushback would be like if you're a billionaire, right? Like
Yeah.
that's measured somehow, like, and that's a measurable thing, right? Like you're called a billionaire because assumingly your net worth is $1 billion. Um,
Yeah.
And like, isn't it kind of a thing? And maybe I don't know if this is. I thought it was like, oh, like if you're in that super ultra net worth category, like your actually salary might be really low. Like I think Jeff Bezos' salary is like quite low, but he's able to just
Zero.
like
Well,
borrow
there's a
against
lot
his
of these
shares of
CEOs
Amazon.
that have a zero salary. They
Right.
get no money.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So their income, quote unquote, is like super low, but like they can go and use their ownership of their companies to get loans to buy their yacht or their house or like whatever it is. So like, isn't there a way that you could just tax not like just tax that as some sort of incremental gain if that's what you were really trying to get? Is like, okay, like you can't just use your own, like whatever thing you're putting up as collateral that clearly has a value, right? And so like there
Mhm.
needs to be some sort of, okay, when you go to buy the thing, whatever the sale price was or whatever the payments are, like that's taxed as if it were income. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
So I think there's two things here. One is like um there's this like thing that they do where they pledge their stock as collateral and borrow the money to spend to stay liquid. Right. So a lot of
mm-hmm,
people say, okay, we shouldn't tax wealth because they can't really do anything with that wealth because it's very illiquid. Then people will come back and say, well, you can, borrow against that and turn your wealth into something liquid.
sure.
And then I guess the other question I guess was like, can't we, is there some way to tax it? I guess
Well,
was the question.
I guess not. I feel like the argument for a wealth tax is like, oh, okay, like we want to bring in more tax revenue, right? At the end of the day, that's I think the goal. But then if it becomes like if you start that and then everyone leaves, then you have less people to tax. You're like, oh crap, that didn't work.
Yeah, I mean, I guess another reason to tax but I think this is a silly reason, is you don't like inequality, so you just want to punish the rich people as well.
Right.
Um, I mean, yeah, you could tax wealth. I just think it's bad because wealth is savings, and it gets when you allocate it, it gets to a productive resource. Say you tax wealth, well, what's Jeff Bezos now incentivized to do? He's now incentivized to spend more money, buy more things. And that actually makes things more expensive for us. If there's less things available, it's all going to Jeff Bezos. That actually makes things more expensive for everyone else. So
Hmm.
it's actually best allocated, basically sitting in that stock market.
Interesting. Do you have a point of view on if you should punish wealthy people or not?
But yeah, you can probably predict what I'm going to say, but I don't think so. I don't think our day-to-day lives are really that affected by having very, very wealthy people. I think what really matters more is, am I improving in my own life? And
Yeah.
I guess and that's
Ooh,
again
yeah.
where growth comes in, right? If the economy is growing, what do I care if somebody's getting a lot more of that growth as long as I'm improving myself? I think
Right.
that makes people satisfied. And so I think a lot of people are angry at inequality when they're really mad at slow growth.
Mm, interesting. Interesting. Or like, yeah, you feel that you're not getting the growth that other people seem to be getting,
Yeah.
right? Interesting. And do you
Yeah.
think
I
that's a
mean,
distinctly Oh yeah, go for it.
you go ahead, go ahead.
Do you think that's like a distinctly American perspective? Like do you think that other countries around the world feel that way? Or it is a little bit of like a uniquely American idea? Because I think you're right. I think if people like if you do feel like you're improving in your life, it's awesome. But I think if you don't feel that you're improving your life, it would suck, right? And you're like going back to like the totally feeling I said of like a person working in a European coffee shop being able to take vacation. I don't know if that's true, but I also feel that like in other countries, your like quality of life is between a 4 and an 8. Like you're never going to
Mhm.
go below a 4 or above an 8. Versus in America, it's like -2 to 12. Like if you're poor in America, like that would suck. But
Yeah.
also you have the opportunity to go up to a 12. But if you're in another country, like your floor is lower, but your ceiling's lower. Again, totally feelings based. That's not rooted in any sort of data.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just an American. So it's tough it's tough to say what it's like in other countries. Um but I think other countries, you know, uh, are more concerned with inequality than we are for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I think you see that with just how they have more generous social safety nets, but they also have higher taxes as
Right.
well. And then you look at actual inequality, right? And in America is a lot more unequal than a lot of other countries. but I don't think that is what matters, right? I don't think that's what people actually get upset about in their lives. I don't think anyone is going around mad at their lives because of Jeff Bezos. I think they project sort of like their own frustration with the lack of the economy working for them on Jeff Bezos and say, hey, inequality is the cause when really slow growth is the cause. But there
Interesting.
is no, there is no person you can point at and say, hey, you're the one causing slow growth. Let's just take everything you've got. And so it's a lot politically, it's a lot harder to sell than saying, hey, look at this guy on his yacht. That could be, you
Sure.
could just have some of his yacht and your life would
Right.
be better.
Look at that rich jerk. Let's go take his yacht.
Right.
What?
I mean,
What?
it's a compelling story.
Totally. Is there a way you said like, oh, there's not someone you could point to like, oh, that's slow growth. Like, what if you were king of the world for a day? Like, what would you do to either accelerate growth, or you can take it with whatever you want? Like, what would you do with the 24 hours that you had?
Yeah. Well, this is why I got into economics, was to figure out, why some countries grow more than others. I don't know if I have an answer, is the issue as well. Um, you know, I think ultimately you have to be pretty unsatisfied with the economics profession that we don't have silver bullets. I think markets work pretty well. You want to let markets work. You just want to get out of the way of a lot of people trying to work to improve their lives. Um, Gosh, if I could just change one or two things. I'm not so sure. I should have something. Consumption tax instead of an income tax, I think, would be pretty good.
Okay,
Um,
with tax breaks for low income earners.
no, yeah, probably. I'd probably try and like control C, control V Germany's healthcare system.
Okay.
But no, I think ultimately like America, in terms of this sort of general slow growth period we exist in, I think America has been doing pretty well. We have like this pretty, and another thing that really drew me to finance is, well, what kind of is this sort of engine of growth is like these new young firms, entrepreneurs starting things
Mm-hmm.
up. And so I was really curious. I'm like, okay, how can we, create more entrepreneurship, get more genius ideas out there? And I think this is actually something America's really good at because we have this really developed ecosystem for financing new risky ideas, right? You look at
Right.
like, where's AI coming from? That's all US firms,
Right.
right? And so I
Well, isn't
think,
also like a good amount in China?
yeah, deep seek, if you want to talk about deep seek, actually China in their electric car industry is actually very impressive as
Yeah,
well.
they're
Actually, that's
bombed.
pretty. I would allow us to import Chinese cars. That would be another
Mm,
thing I would do.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
yeah. There you go. All these trade barriers I think are really bad. I would get rid of all the tariffs.
Okay.
Let America buy, cheap stuff. Right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Why are we taxing ourselves in there? Um, I know. I think like America is one of the best countries to start a business in, and I think that's if I could do stuff to make that easier, I would. But I think that's it's easier if I was king of Europe to say what I would do because Europe makes it really really difficult to start a business. It's got really really tight labor laws as well, and so I think that would be easier for me to intervene in. But I think America's
Interesting.
kind of in terms of at least in this period that we live in, where it seems like growth is really difficult to come by, America's, muddling along pretty well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. 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 Dude, you're a beast. I love hearing your thoughts. I wanted to do this for so long.
I hope it's everything you were dreaming of.
And then some. I learned so much. I feel like I didn't know probably 80% of the things you said. I was like, I didn't know that. Like what is it? TFP? Total
Total factor productivity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's sick. That's like a way cooler measurement. Like why doesn't everyone know that as opposed to GDP?
Well,
That seems like a way
GDP,
better measurement.
it's tough to measure and it's not right. So like, okay, so we have this idea of total factor productivity, and then you have to go into the data and say, oh, how do we actually measure this thing? How do
Got
you
it. Got it.
how do you
Got it.
measure putting in 4 widgets and getting out 7, chunks? Well, it's really not easy, right? GDP also really really tough to measure, but at least like, we have spent a really, really long time measuring that thing. It's a little bit less of a theoretical construct, right? And so it's a really practical number, whereas TFP is a lot harder to measure. And so,
Got
yeah,
it.
TFP is the thing that matters more, but the thing that we can work with more is GDP.
Got it. Okay. All right. So maybe we'll keep that for now
So, I
as
mean,
a good
here's another
definition.
lesson from economics is that everything's trade-offs, right?
Right.
And so there's right, the cost of something is what you give up to get it, right? So when I go to the play, what I'm giving up is the fact that I can't go see the opera. The cost isn't the ticket. It's,
Right.
when I'm getting my PhD, the cost isn't, the cost through the PhD. It's I could have been working and making
Sure.
money for these 5 years,
Sure.
4 years, but it'll be more. So right, so it's trade-offs all the way. So yeah, TFP is like a really nice number, but you can't. GDP is, not as great of a number. It's a really, really clunky number, but you can measure it. So
Got it.
everything's trade-off.
Got it.
Everything's trade-off.
So, okay, I think what I don't know if we got to the point, like, what do you want to do? Like, what you finish your PhD, what then? Do you want to go into academia? Do you want to be teaching? Do you want to be doing research? Like all the above?
All the above, all the above. That's what academia is. Academia is research and teaching, right? It's finding
Okay.
new ideas and then passing along ideas as well.
Well, dude, you're a phenomenal teacher. I feel like I would love to take all of your classes. You like to explain things very, very well, and like you're able to dumb it down to people like me, which is I
Well,
really
it's because I had to
appreciate.
dumb it down for myself. It's true. It's true. Like I don't feel like I've really understood something unless if I can explain it in a really dumb way.
hmm Dude,
And
that's
it
the
just
Einstein quote.
bothers me. It just bothers me in my head when I'm like, there's just, when you like learn something, but there's still like that little bit of thing that like doesn't quite click with you. And that just
Yeah.
bothers me. And so I like just have this drive to like get rid of that little click, have that thing click in so that I can, really, really figure things out. Like these things should be simple, because
Right.
the world was created by humans, so humans should be able to. Well, that's a big claim I just made. I actually completely take back what I was just about to say.
What are the classes you're currently teaching?
So I'm not teaching anything right now. So I'm TAing
Okay.
for a sustainable investments class. But then in the fall, I also TA for investment management. And what I taught over the summer was investment management.
Okay. So cool, man. So cool. What are some of the things, like, what do you like to listen to? Like, are you a big reader? Do you listen to podcasts? Are you like, what do you consume?
Yeah. So there's a pretty big econ blogosphere.
Okay.
So there's quite a few blogs that I consume. One that I would really recommend is Conversable Economist. So he's the editor at this actually amazing journal called the Journal of Economic Perspectives. And what that journal does is basically it's supposed to be a bridge between, econ academia and the media. And
Oh,
so
wow.
if you are a journalist and you're curious about a topic, well, the JEP will have an article written by, experts in the field for journalists. And so if there's a topic that, I want just like a lay understanding of, I'll go to the JEP. The editor also writes an amazing blog as well. So I'd really
Okay.
recommend Conversable Economist. And then another podcast I really like is Conversations with Tyler. Tyler Cohn's a really annoying guy, but he has a great podcast as well.
Okay. I actually don't know that one. Conversation with Tyler?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Sweet. Well, dude, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate you. And I'm looking forward to more of me annoyingly asking you questions next time we hang out.
Yeah, this was really fun.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much again, man. I appreciate you.
You're welcome.
Bye, everybody.